The first time Nathan Reynolds spotted Brenda Harrington dragging her garden hose across his lawn at 5:43 a.m. on a Tuesday, he thought he must be hallucinating from lack of sleep. He'd been up most of the night finishing architectural designs for a demanding client, and the image of his next-door neighbor, clad in a floral bathrobe with her graying blonde hair set in pink plastic curlers, sneaking around his property seemed more like a stress-induced mirage than reality. Nathan rubbed his bloodshot eyes and squinted through his kitchen window. No, he wasn't imagining things. There she was, the self-appointed queen of Sycamore Heights, HOA, carefully connecting her garden hose to his outdoor spigot. "What the actual," he muttered, nearly spilling his coffee as he set it down with a thud. Sycamore Heights was an immaculately maintained suburban development where homes started at $500,000 and the Homeowners Association rules filled a binder thicker than a college textbook. Nathan had moved in just 3 months ago, and Brenda Harrington had made it her personal mission to educate him on every bylaw, regulation, and unwritten rule from day one. His grass had been too long by a quarter inch. His mailbox was the wrong shade of hunter green. The potted plants on his front porch were not in keeping with the neighborhood aesthetic. Each violation came with a passive-aggressive note left in his mailbox, always signed with a flourishing "Regards, Brenda Harrington, HOA Community Standards Committee Chair." But this was something else entirely. Nathan grabbed his phone and started recording as Brenda, apparently satisfied with her connection, began watering her prized rose bushes with what was undeniably his water. The bushes formed an impressive boundary between their properties, blooms so perfect it looked artificial. They'd won her the neighborhood garden competition 3 years running, according to the neighborhood welcome packet she thrust into his hands the day he moved in. "You have got to be kidding me," Nathan whispered to himself, zooming in on the video. Just then, Brenda glanced up, locking eyes with him through the window. Rather than looking embarrassed or apologetic at being caught red-handed, she smiled warmly and waved as if what she was doing was perfectly normal. Nathan's jaw dropped. The audacity of this woman was truly breathtaking. He threw on a pair of shoes and marched outside, still in his rumpled t-shirt and sweatpants. "Good morning, Mrs. Harrington," he called out, trying to keep his tone civil despite his rising blood pressure. "May I ask why you're using my water spigot?" Brenda turned, her pearl earrings catching the early morning sunlight. "Oh, Nathan, dear, I hope I didn't wake you. I'm just giving my roses their morning drink." She gestured to the vibrant flowers as if that explained everything. "Yes, I can see that. But you're using my water to do it," Nathan said slowly, as if explaining a simple concept to a child. Brenda's smile never faltered. "Well, you see, the water pressure on your side is much better for the delicate root systems. My spigot just doesn't provide the gentle flow these beauties need." She lovingly stroked a crimson petal. "Besides, I've been doing this for years. The Johnsons who lived here before never minded." Nathan blinked, momentarily stunned into silence. The Johnsons never minded that you were stealing their water. "Stealing is such an ugly word, dear," Brenda replied with a light laugh that set Nathan's teeth on edge. "Think of it as a neighborhood resource allocation. We all pitch in here at Sycamore Heights." She began coiling up her hose. "But I'm all finished now, so no harm done. Your water bill might be a smidge higher. That's the price of living in a blue-ribbon community, isn't it?" As she sauntered back to her property, Nathan stood rooted to the spot, the morning dew soaking through his slippers. The realization dawned on him slowly. This wasn't a one-time occurrence. The water bill that had seemed suspiciously high for a single man living alone suddenly made sense. Nathan glanced at his phone, still recording, and then at his water spigot. A plan began forming in his mind, a plan involving vinegar, some non-toxic dye, and a lesson about boundaries that Brenda Harrington wouldn't soon forget. The war had begun. Nathan spent the following week documenting Brenda's early morning water raids. Like clockwork, she appeared at 5:30 a.m. sharp, dragging her expensive garden hose across his lawn to water her precious roses. Each time he added another video to his growing collection of evidence, watching from behind his kitchen blinds, as she helped herself to his water with the confidence of someone who had never faced consequences. "This ends now," Nathan muttered to himself on Sunday evening, pulling up his latest water bill on his laptop. The figure at the bottom made him wince, nearly double what a single person should reasonably be paying. He did some quick calculations and realized that Brenda's borrowed water was costing him over $75 a month. As an architectural engineer, Nathan approached problems methodically. He considered several options, confronting Brenda again, likely futile, reporting her to the HOA, which she essentially controlled, or installing a lockbox on his spigot, which would violate HOA regulations about visible security devices. None seemed satisfactory. That's when inspiration struck. The next morning, Nathan called in sick to work, a rarity for him. But today's mission demanded his full attention. After confirming Brenda had left for her weekly hair appointment 9 o'clock a.m. every Monday at Scissors and Style, as she'd mentioned repeatedly, Nathan got to work. First, he detached his regular garden hose and replaced it with a brand new one. Next, he visited his garage where he prepared his supplies, a 5-gallon bucket, white vinegar, and a bottle of blue food coloring, the non-toxic kind used for cakes. The color choice wasn't random. Blue would show up beautifully against Brenda's prized red roses. This is either the pettiest or most brilliant thing I've ever done, Nathan chuckled as he carefully mixed his concoction. The vinegar wouldn't kill our plants. He wasn't a monster. But it would certainly disrupt their pH balance enough to make them droopy for a while. The dye, however, would be much harder to explain away. Working efficiently, Nathan connected a small pump to his spigot. The device, usually used for fertilizer distribution, would create a siphon effect, drawing the vinegar dye mixture into the water line when the faucet was activated. He set it up so the mixture would only be pulled when the water pressure reached a certain level, exactly the level needed for Brenda's gentle flow for delicate root systems. When he finished, Nathan stepped back to admire his handiwork. To the casual observer, nothing looked different about his outdoor water setup, but he knew better. Now it was time to wait. At 4:30 the next morning, Nathan's alarm jolted him awake. He wanted front-row seats to the show. He made coffee, positioned himself by the kitchen window with a perfect view of his side yard, and waited in the pre-dawn darkness. Sure enough, at 5:28 a.m., Brenda's porch light clicked on. 2 minutes later, she emerged in her signature bathrobe, hair curlers, and Nathan noted with amusement, gardening gloves that probably cost more than his work shoes. Through his barely parted blinds, Nathan watched as she stealthily crossed onto his property, pulling her hose behind her. She connected to his spigot with practiced ease, turned the handle, and aimed the spray at her beloved roses. For a few moments, everything seemed normal. Then, as the siphon effect kicked in, the water streaming from her hose gradually took on a distinctly blue tint. Brenda didn't notice at first, humming to herself as she methodically watered each bush. It wasn't until she bent down to inspect a lower branch that she froze, her body going rigid with shock. What on earth? Her voice carried clearly in the still morning air. Nathan had to bite his knuckle to keep from laughing out loud as Brenda frantically examined the spray, then her gloves, which were now stained a vibrant blue. Panicking, she shut off the water and disconnected her hose, but the damage was already done. The morning dew mixed with the blue-tinged water made her precious roses look like they'd been vandalized by a graffiti artist with a vendetta against gardening. Her immaculate white gardening gloves were ruined, blue liquid dripping from her fingertips onto her designer bathrobe. But worst of all, her championship roses, her pride and joy, her ticket to neighborhood supremacy, were now splattered with unmistakable blue splotches. No, no, no! Brenda's wail echoed across the lawn as she desperately tried to rinse the color off with the remaining water in her hose, but only succeeded in spreading the blue tint further. Nathan sank down below his window, shoulders shaking with silent laughter. Phase 1 of his plan had worked perfectly, but this was just the beginning. Tomorrow he'd increase the dye concentration. And if Brenda still didn't get the message, well, he had a few more tricks planned. Vandalism, Nathan repeated, maintaining a perfect mask of innocence as he leaned against his doorframe. I'm not sure I understand, Mrs. Harrington. Brenda's face contorted with fury, blue-stained fingers pointing accusingly at him. Don't play dumb with me, young man. Look what your water did to my award-winning roses. Behind her, the HOA security officer, whose name tag read Walt, shifted uncomfortably. Nathan peered past them toward Brenda's yard, where her once immaculate red roses now sported uneven patches of blue. He had to admit the effect was more dramatic than he anticipated. That's unfortunate, Nathan said, fighting to keep his voice steady, but I'm not sure what it has to do with me. Your water is contaminated with some kind of blue poison, Brenda sputtered, holding up her stained hands as evidence. And you did it deliberately. Walt cleared his throat. Mrs. Harrington claims you sabotaged your own water line to damage her property, Mr. Reynolds. That's a serious accusation. It certainly is, Nathan agreed, then paused thoughtfully. May I ask, Mrs. Harrington, why were you using my water in the first place? The question hung in the air like a poorly tossed grenade. Walt turned to Brenda, eyebrows raised in question. Well, that's not, she stammered, her righteous indignation faltering momentarily. Nathan pressed his advantage, because I find it interesting that you're accusing me of sabotaging my own water when you shouldn't have been accessing it at all. He pulled out his phone. Would you like to see the security footage I've been collecting for the past week? Walt's professional demeanor shifted subtly. Security footage? Oh yes, Nathan nodded, opening his gallery app. Mrs. Harrington has been helping herself to my water at 5:30 every morning. I have 7 days' worth of video showing her trespassing on my property. He held out his phone, displaying crystal-clear footage of Brenda connecting her hose to his spigot just that morning. Walt watched the video, his expression growing increasingly uncomfortable. Brenda's face had turned a shade of red that nearly matched her roses, or at least what they used to look like. "This is absurd," she huffed. "Everyone knows the Johnsons always let me use their spigot for my roses." "I'm not the Johnsons," Nathan said calmly, "and I never gave you permission to use my water, which incidentally has been costing me an extra $75 a month." Walt turned to Brenda. "Mrs. Harrington were using Mr. Reynolds' water without permission." "That's beside the point," Brenda snapped. "Look at my hands. Look at my roses." "Actually, ma'am, it's very much the point," Walt replied, his professional tone tinged with wariness that suggested this wasn't his first encounter with Brenda's entitlement. "If you were on his property without permission, using his utilities without consent, that's trespassing and theft." "Theft? How dare you?" Brenda gasped. "I am the chair of the Community Standards Committee. I've lived in Sycamore Heights for 17 years. Nathan decided to twist the knife a little further. "Actually, while we're on the subject of community standards, I believe Section 8, Paragraph 3 of the HOA bylaws specifically prohibits unauthorized use of another resident's utilities or property." He smiled pleasantly. "I've been studying the handbook you so kindly provided." Walt looked impressed despite himself. "He's right, Mrs. Harrington. This is outrageous." Brenda's voice had risen to a pitch that had neighborhood dogs barking. "Are you siding with this water saboteur?" "I'm not sabotaging anything," Nathan replied coolly. "I simply changed my gardening routine. I started using a natural mixture of vinegar and food coloring in my water line as part of an eco-friendly pest control system for my lawn. Completely non-toxic and HOA compliant, I checked. Of course, I only use it on my property, which is where my water is supposed to stay." This was, of course, a complete fabrication, but Nathan delivered it with such conviction that Walt nodded thoughtfully. "Many homeowners are turning to natural solutions these days," Walt agreed. "My sister uses vinegar for her garden pests, too." Brenda stood speechless, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She looked from Walt to Nathan and back again, unable to believe her usual tactics weren't working. "I want to file a formal complaint," she finally managed. "Of course, Mrs. Harrington," Walt said. "I'll need to document everything, including the unauthorized water usage." The Sycamore Heights Community Center buzzed with anticipation. The monthly HOA meeting had never seen such attendance. Every folding chair was filled with latecomers standing along the walls. Nathan sat in the third row, surrounded by his newfound allies, Priya and her husband Vikram to his left, the retired Millers to his right, and behind him, at least a dozen other homeowners who had privately shared their own Brenda stories with him over the past 2 weeks. "I haven't seen a turnout like this since they tried to ban outdoor Christmas decorations in 2019, Mrs. Miller whispered, her eyes gleaming with excitement. The room fell silent as Gerald Hoffman, the HOA president, cleared his throat. The kindly retired judge with a penchant for bow ties, Gerald had served as president for 5 years, largely because no one else wanted the headache of managing Sycamore Heights' complicated politics. "Before we begin our regular agenda," Gerald announced, adjusting his spectacles, "we need to address the incident that occurred 2 weeks ago involving Mrs. Harrington and Mr. Reynolds." All eyes turned to the front row, where Brenda sat ramrod straight, her attorney, a nervous-looking young man clutching an overstuffed briefcase, beside her. She had spent the past 2 weeks avoiding her neighbors, desperately trying to restore her roses with every treatment imaginable. The blue tint had faded to a strange purplish hue that clashed horribly with the red blooms. Nathan had removed his vinegar dye contraption the same day as the confrontation, but Brenda hadn't attempted to use his water again. In fact, her garden hose remained coiled tightly on her lawn, unused. Gerald continued, "As many of you know, an incident report was filed alleging unauthorized use of utilities. Since then, several other residents have come forward with similar complaints." He looked uncomfortable. "The board has reviewed all evidence, including video footage from multiple properties and sworn statements from 12 households." Brenda's attorney stood, smoothing his ill-fitting suit. "My client categorically denies any wrongdoing. Mrs. Harrington has been a pillar of this community for nearly 2 decades. These accusations are nothing more than a coordinated attack on her character by a disgruntled new resident." He shot Nathan a hostile glance. Nathan kept his expression neutral, fighting the urge to roll his eyes. In the days following the Blue Water incident, he'd become something of a neighborhood celebrity. Neighbors who had previously avoided eye contact now greeted him enthusiastically. He'd been invited to 4 barbecues, Huguenot parties, and a book club. It turned out that Brenda's reign of terror had affected far more residents than anyone had realized, but no one had dared to challenge her until now. "Mr. Hoffman," Nathan said, rising to his feet. "If I may?" Gerald nodded. "Go ahead, Mr. Reynolds." "I'm not interested in vilifying anyone," Nathan began, choosing his words carefully. "When I moved to Sycamore Heights, I was looking for community. What I found instead was a $75 monthly surcharge on my water bill. Appreciative chuckles rippled through the room. All I did was document what was happening on my property and take steps to protect my resources. If Mrs. Harrington had simply asked for permission to use my water, we might have come to an arrangement. He paused. But she didn't ask, and apparently she hasn't been asking anyone else either. This is slander, Brenda interjected, her face flushed. I've served this community tirelessly. My roses have brought prestige to Sycamore Heights, 3 consecutive Garden Association awards. At whose expense? Priya called out from beside Nathan. Gerald rapped his gavel. Order, please. Let's keep this civil. Walt, the security officer, stepped forward with a thick folder. Sir, we've compiled documentation from all affected households. The patterns are consistent across properties. Unauthorized access typically occurred between 5:30 and 6:15 a.m., targeting homes with corner lots or whose owners work early shifts. Conservative estimates suggest Mrs. Harrington's unauthorized water usage cost her neighbors a combined total of approximately $4,200 over the past 3 years. A collective gasp went through the room. Gerald's bow tie seemed to droop. That's substantial, he managed. My client is prepared to issue a formal apology, Brenda's attorney quickly interjected, and perhaps make a reasonable contribution to the community garden fund. Absolutely not. Brenda hissed loudly enough for everyone to hear. Her attorney winced. If we could have a brief recess, please. No need, Gerald said firmly. The board has already reached a decision. He cleared his throat again. Mrs. Harrington, your actions constitute multiple violations of our community bylaws. 6 months had transformed Sycamore Heights. The brilliant colors of autumn had given way to winter and then spring, bringing more than just seasonal change to the neighborhood. Nathan stood in his front yard on a perfect Saturday morning, admiring his newly installed rain barrel system. The sustainable water collection setup had been his first proposal as a member of the Community Standards Committee, and after some initial resistance from the old guard, it had passed with overwhelming support. Now, a dozen homes in Sycamore Heights sported similar systems, cutting water usage and utility bills across the neighborhood. Looking good, Reynolds called Mr. Miller from across the street where he was installing solar-powered garden lights, another previously forbidden modification now permitted under the revised HOA guidelines. Nathan waved back with a smile. In the 6 months since the Great Blue Rose incident, as neighborhood lore now called it, he found himself at the center of a quiet revolution in Sycamore Heights. The Community Standards Committee, once Brenda's personal fiefdom, had been transformed into a collaborative group focused on balancing property values with modern, sustainable living practices. Hey, committee man, Priya's voice carried across the lawn as she approached carrying a plate covered in foil. Mom made her famous samosas. She said to bring you some since you helped Vikram with the backyard pergola design. Your mom is the best, Nathan said, accepting the plate gratefully. How's the planning for the block party coming along? Priya beamed. Amazing. We've got 32 households confirmed. That's twice as many as last year's turnout. The annual Sycamore Heights block party had previously been a stiff, formal affair with strict rules about noise levels and approved food items. This year, under the direction of the new social committee, headed by Priya, it promised to be a genuine celebration of community, diverse, inclusive, and actually fun. As they chatted about the upcoming festivities, a moving truck rumbled down the street, followed by a luxury SUV. Both vehicles stopped in front of the house directly across from Nathan's, Brenda's former residence. True to her dramatic exit promise, Brenda Harrington had listed her home for sale just days after the HOA meeting. However, contrary to her dire predictions about property values plummeting without her vigilance, the house had sold within a week for well above asking price. The Sycamore Heights market remained as desirable as ever, even without fluorescent paint violation notices appearing on mailboxes for minor infractions. Nathan and Priya watched with undisguised curiosity as a young couple emerged from the SUV, followed by 2 elementary school-aged children and a golden retriever. New neighbors, Priya whispered unnecessarily. I heard they're both doctors. Nathan nodded. Gerald mentioned they were excited about the community garden project. The garden had been Nathan's second major initiative, transforming an unused common area into a shared space where residents could grow vegetables and flowers. The plot where Brenda's infamous roses had once reigned supreme had been donated to the project by the new homeowners before they'd even moved in, a fact that had given the entire neighborhood a sense of poetic justice. Should we go introduce ourselves? Priya asked. Absolutely, Nathan agreed. Let's give them a moment to get settled. As they watched, the family explored their new front yard, the children running circles around their parents while the dog bounded joyfully across the lawn. They looked happy, excited, unburdened by concerns about whether their mailbox was the correct shade of green or their grass was precisely the right height. Priya said, "I've lived here for 5 years, and this is the first time it actually feels like a real neighborhood." Nathan nodded in agreement. It's amazing what can happen when people focus on building community instead of enforcing rules. The sound of more cars arriving drew their attention. Walt pulled up, followed by the Millers and several other neighbors, all carrying welcome baskets and dishes of food. Spontaneously, without any committee planning or formal organization, the residents of Sycamore Heights were gathering to welcome their new neighbors. "I had a letter from Brenda last week," Priya said suddenly, keeping her voice low even though the subject of their conversation was now living in a condo 40 miles away. Nathan raised an eyebrow. "Really? What does she want?" "To inform me that the flowers in my front beds don't complement my shutter color. And,"